Hello, everyone. Welcome to Variety Hour for 2024. Lovely to see you all. We have an awesome lineup to kick off this year's sessions, but what a pleasure to see everyone's faces and to have you all here today. We have five speakers. Well, I mean, technically six speakers because we have our quiz as well. But we have Chelsea Miao and Craig joining us as in our speed talk section, and then we have Lasha and Jason joining us for a slightly longer talk. Now, Jason needs to shoot off on the hour, or maybe a little bit before the hour, so we're actually going to move stuff around today. So we have our longer talk up front, and then we have our speed talks after the quiz, after the midpoint. So I'm going to hand over immediately to our two first speakers, Jason and Lasha. Do you want to take it away? Oh, before you start, I actually want to just say I'm really excited about this. I first saw Jason present some of these ideas like late last year, and it just seemed to be one of the you guys seem to be doing stuff with data and ML that I'm not seeing from anyone else. So I thought I'm just so glad that you guys have had time to come and share this with us. So hopefully it's as interesting to everyone else as well. So Jason and Lasha, please take it away.
Thank you. Can everyone see my screen?
Yep, you're awesome to go.
Thank you. I'm Jason Holmberg, Chief Data Officer at Conservation X Labs, and joining me today is Lasha Otarashvili, Senior Computer Vision Research Engineer, also at Conservation X Labs. I'll just be doing a short intro because I think a lot of the background of WildMe is online, but I just want to set up the problem and then give Lasha a lot of time to talk about some of the innovations he's doing in multi-species machine learning, specifically re-identifying individuals in very novel and large ways. The mission of Conservation X Labs is to end human-induced extinction, and the WildMe lab has some very novel ways we approach this problem. Specifically, we're interested in population assessment. How many animals do we have? What conservation strategies can improve that number? And how do we iterate those conservation strategies so that we're continuously improving population health? We kind of do it in two different ways. Let's see if, there we go. One is through aerial surveys with our Scout product, which uses AI to get through large volumes, often hundreds of thousands of images, to try to find images that have animals, and then find and count the animals in that subset of imagery. An even larger part of our work is marker capture. How do we tag and track individual animals? Now, what I'm showing you is the old world of bird banding, deer ear tagging, but really we use computer vision to replace these invasive methods and to find animals in photographs and to individually identify them. Now, the pictures I've shown you are the easy cases, the sort of faux representations of what we do. Real-world AI, especially when you're supporting real-world users, not just producing a paper, not just publishing a model, but actually getting these models and software into the field is much more difficult. This is an example aerial survey image from the real world. I would not have found the 4 elephants that expert reviewers found and drew bounding boxes around in this image. But this is on the left there. These are actual elephants, and this is a real-world example of an aerial survey in the Casa Transfrontier area looking for elephants. This is the kind of imagery we have to deal with. Similarly, we might get the opposite, which is thousands of caribou in an image. How do we find and count the caribou in this image to help scientists determine how many caribou are in Alaska? The re-ID problem can be even more complex because we have to not only find every zebra in the photograph, and there's a great argument about whether there's 12, 13, 14, maybe less, maybe more zebras in this photograph and their overlap, but also we not only have to find them, but then we have to take each of them, extract them, and try to match them across a database of potentially tens of thousands of other individuals. Move this off to the side a little bit. So we've got to go through tens of thousands of images, find exactly that zebra or those 12 or 14 zebras from that image. And we have to do this supporting multiple users across the globe in our infrastructure. And we can get anywhere from 2,000 to 12,000 demands for re-ID per day. How do we approach this problem? First, we use machine learning to do detection. We try to find each and every animal in each and every photograph, draw a bounding box around the salient feature, whether it's the whole body or the head of a right whale, like you see in the upper right, the flank of a dolphin or the fluke of a humpback whale. First, we localize in the image, then we start using multiple machine learning models to label the viewpoint, left or right, top or bottom, label the species, sometimes label the part, and in the future, potentially even label behavior. Once we have localized the animal in the photograph, predicted the viewpoint, then we're going to run a fine-grained classifier, a re-ID algorithm. Here we're demonstrating the older world hotspotter algorithm, and we're going to try to match individuals based on apparent features. It might be splotches, stripes. Here you see the matched coat of an African wild dog. These AI algorithms have to be usable. We don't expect biologists to be Python experts, so we need to put them somewhere, and we need to make them easy to use. So in this case, we put them what are called online wildbooks, where just by accessing a browser, a researcher can upload their data, execute these multiple stages of machine learning, and come to the decision, which individual animal is this, and then ultimately try to export that data for population modeling and estimation to help them evaluate, to define and evaluate conservation strategies. Currently, across wildbooks, we're tracking over 1 million encounters. We're tracking 207,000 plus individual animals. And you can see each week we track how much data are we onboarding. So last week, for example, 3,807 encounters were reported, and we identified 447 new individuals across all the species we support, running all these different algorithms, whether it's fluke matching, dorsal matching, aerial matching. We have these different techniques and approaches that we've applied to identify individual animals. The problem is, and we discovered this in 2022 and more in 2023, that we can become the victim of our own success. Scaling AI with real-world data and real-world users doesn't work on a per-species basis. If we're developing AI on a per-species basis, we have these limited data sets that limit the accuracy and generalization to just the data we're given for that one species, and we've created a whole project effort for limited impact. Different animals have different visual features, fins, flukes, flanks. And if we keep having these custom engagements with every researcher with their custom data schemas, trying to get them in Wildbook, developing custom AI algorithms, then not only are we feeding siloing data habits by just treating each data set as this individual silo that we're serving, but oftentimes we're retraining the models, and we have to retrain them for cross-expansion, cross-application, and expansion. An example is North Atlantic right whales. We trained AI for North Atlantic right whales, and the researchers always had the heads facing up. We created a highly accurate model. The moment we began cross-applying that model to southern right whales, the data standard was different. All the heads in the photographs were pointed down. The model didn't work. That simple change was enough diversity to fool the AI model. And if we keep creating these ones per species projects and per species models, we really don't scale. We often have to retrain these multiple AI algorithms. And really, if we can only get, let's say, 6 or 7 projects done a year, are we scaling to solve the extinction crisis for many, many species across the globe? And the answer is clearly no. Multiple computer vision algorithms and architectures also get us into trouble when we're talking about scaling, serving more and more users, running more and more machine learning jobs. It's expensive to support many, many servers. It's expensive to support many, many algorithms, all of which require their own maintenance, their own custom knowledge. That gives us many things to debug, to optimize, to synchronize, all of which can fall out of sync, can have these individualized bugs, and require very custom knowledge to fix each one of them. These algorithms, fighting, whether they're matching fins, flukes, flanks, et cetera, are fighting for computer resources, whether it's the CPU or the GPU. We have, as I mentioned, somewhere between 2,000 and 12,000 requests today to do re-ID. All of these different algorithms for different species are all competing for the same resources. And then we're promoting this knowledge siloing where we need to know very specific things about an algorithm that others outside of our community might not know. So these are the problems we got into with these very bespoke per species projects and applying AI for them. Now, let me turn this presentation over to Lasha to discuss how we're unblocking ourselves by looking at multi-feature, multi-species AI for the re-identification of individuals.
The question is, why multi-species? If you think about how a non-expert human would approach a problem, they might not have domain knowledge, but they have experience. They have world knowledge and the ability to map those experiences onto new problems and get up to speed real fast. This ability lets us humans to become proficient at tasks really quickly, as quick as from showing us a couple of examples. But the model starts from a blank state. They think, for example, that for a beluga whale model, the only worldview that it has is the top-down drawn images of the backs of the beluga whales. So why don't we change this? And we had some anecdotal evidence, for example, for some species that we didn't have training data for. We would take a model that was trained on a similar species and cross-apply it. And the results were mixed, but the signal was there. So we went a step further and decided to put multiple species into a data set that could be jointly trained on, with the rationale being that the features usable for re-ID for one species could carry over to another species. Basically, we could expand the worldview of the model. So with the initial experiments on next slide, we started off by taking species from the Flukes platform, 21 marine species, cetaceans, whales, dolphins, and sometimes sharks, and trained a single model for each of them. The bars you see is the measured performance of the expected chance that you'll see a correct match as the first ranking in the wild book. And you'll see there's a general trend here that the data sets with more data to the right generally perform better, which means that as for all AI tasks, data is king. But the reality is we don't always have data. So with the next iteration, what we did is put all those 21 species into a single data set and retrained a joint single model for all of the species together. And on the next slide, we did a comparison. The blue line is the multi-species model. The improvements are significant, especially as you move down towards the data sets with smaller data to the left. The gap we see compared to single species is enormous. What this means is there's mutual benefit for all the species, and especially for the species that the data just does not scale. This unlocks a new possibility of actually putting out useful models for the researchers to get up to speed with, to bootstrap new data sets and get to the level of to the right, which is lots of data, but it's hard to come by because that's blood, sweat, and tears of years of work for groups of researchers. And sometimes the species are so elusive that it's not even feasible to collect as much data. For example, to the right, you see bottlenose dolphins, which have over 20,000 labeled images, which is for wildlife ID standards a lot. But then we naturally asked ourselves another question. If we took this model and reapplied to a species that is not seen at all, how would it perform? So we did another experiment, trained 21 more models, but in a different fashion. For each model, we took 20 species of the 21 and left one out. And then we tested the performance for that species, simulating the mechanism of having the species not been previously seen. And the results on the next slide were quite interesting. This is the green line, the leave one out experiments. The blue line is the multi-species model, and the orange line is the single species model. What we saw is for some of the species, the expected generalization, even without training data, was just as good as doing a full ML cycle of analyzing the data, getting a data set, and doing the training. Again, the trend is dependent on the amount of data, with less species actually doing better or having less benefit with training just because of low amount of data. But what's also peculiar to see is that if you compare the green lines to the orange lines to the left, you'll see that the effect of small amount of data training for specific species is weaker than the transfer of knowledge that we can obtain from all the other species in the green line. So that's synergy. And these are some of the examples of the data points on the next slide that we used to match. But let's keep it on this slide first. The way it's changed, the requirements of training is the following. Basically, previously, if a researcher wanted to see a machine learning model for WildMe, we would have really demanding requirements, a couple of thousands of labeled annotations, a couple of hundreds of individuals. But in the new multi-species fashion, that changes. And that changes in a way that even small data sets mixed in with the big multi-species worldview domain knowledge means that we can get results much faster. For example, here we did an experiment where we scaled data set step by step. And what we observed is that the 10% of the original target data set size, which would have been 5,000 samples, 500 samples got us 50% of the way. So 10% of the effort put in, 50% of the results taken out. This means that for everybody, for researchers working on in environments or species that we don't support yet, they can get up to speed much faster. They can do a couple of labeling runs and get a model performance that's reasonable enough that they can start the cycle of using it, refining on it, using it as an assistant, as suggestions, and expanding their work in a broader, larger subset of data. And on the next slide are some of the examples of the matches we see. These are what we call hard cases or emergent properties, whereas in multi-species pattern, not only we match the species, we also match them in a more complex manner. We can match left sides to the right sides of the dolphin flukes because the model can focus on the shape and not just the texture. It can also pick out the interesting regions to focus on, so we can match full body images to partial bodies, or in cases where we have partial occlusion and wild deformation or change and shift in viewpoint or lighting conditions, which means that we keep operating in stricter environments, we keep making use of more data, and we keep making more matches for better results. Now, this is a big change in how we approach things, because now what we can do is we can scale. The researchers can scale because they can get up to speed with less amount of effort put in. Our servers can scale because the algorithms are faster and they can serve out more requests per day on an order of magnitude. And importantly, WildMe can scale, because previously when we did a breakthrough in modeling, we had these 50 plus models and somebody had to go back and retrain those. And this is no longer the case. What we can focus on is not maintenance, but we can focus on advancing the state of the art, advancing the frontier, and getting results that are actually valuable, and doing it in a rapid manner, which is, I would say personally, more thrilling. But of course, all this good stuff, and if you've been using Wildbook, there's lots of good stuff, but these models have their own specificalities, their own drawbacks, and weird ways that they sometimes fail. On the next slide, we have an example match. Let's go to the next one, please. We have an example match of a beluga whale. And what happens here is, surprisingly to us, model focuses on the tiny dorsal ridge that the beluga whale has. This is a really obscure feature, which predominantly, if you ask human experts, is not really the most useful signal for identifying. The most useful signal would be the mating scars, the propeller scars, or different discolorations that really are telling what the individual is. But for some reason, the model chooses to focus on these dorsal ridges. And it does its task well. it set the state of the art for the beluga whales, but there is a question, which is why focus on the dorsal ridges? Is it because they have signal that we humans could not perceive with our own eyes, or couldn't think would be useful? Or is it because it just hasn't learned any better? Why wouldn't it use these scars? And the answer is, it won't tell. And that goes for the cases of all the other species. We have these matches, we have these activation maps of model looking elsewhere, and even if they make sense, they don't really tell the same story that we would expect from a human expert. So the bottom line is, what is a model? A model is a distillation of expert knowledge bottled up in a ready-to-use, simple-to-serve package. But it is not really, even though it mimics the expert interaction, it mimics the outcomes that the expert would do in being in works with the task. It actually works really differently. It's free to choose what to rely on, and its principles are guided by linear algebra and not by neurochemistry. So we get these interactions, this black box effect, where we get the results, but we never really know where or how. So this gives us a new broad discussion that we can talk about what really is a model and what place it has going forward in the next stages of research. And what I think a model is not really a next better version of ourselves, meaning to substitute us, but it's a companion. It thinks differently, it works differently, its complexity, its notion of complexity is way different than what is for ours. So we need to collaborate. So on the next slide and the slide after, I have this couple of points of what could be next. And what could be next is a bit of a sci-fi, but really is a reality that we're right now working on, which is to move from the black box to a companion. Instead of getting just the results, be able to start a dialogue with the model, ask why it has made the decisions it has made, what underlying assumptions it made to lead to that. And if it had made the same assumptions for all the other cases, because sometimes you find out something, your model has been acting up, say, and you want to go back and rectify all the other cases the model could have misacted in the same way. You want to curate your data set, you want the model to cross-check itself, go back, fix the errors, and tell you what it does. So in the end, what we're trying to do is this mix of visual language models. So instead of having MuID, have a language part, including to the model, which you could interact with, which you could ask research questions, pick its brains, know how it ticks, get to know it better, and also provide your own suggestions, guide its behavior in how you want to do it. And with that, we probably are advancing towards the next step of the human AI interaction, which goes from this black box to a companion. Hope not overdue, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you. We're slightly behind time, but Rob, do you want to ask your question real quick?
Yeah, great talk. Very exciting to see this. I was just wondering, with the multi-species model, how similar do the species have to be to get the kinds of gains that you are seeing? Like, for example, could you add seals to your model with dolphins and whales and expect to see good results or not?
Yeah, great question. So initially, we started conservatively building up species on the notion of how similar they are. So we started with just the fins, expanded to all the marine animals, and are now expanding to all the animals, terrestrials, faces, different approaches. And what we see is for now, we have not hit a stopping wall for mutual benefit as of yet. But there's also another interaction, which is you probably should expect your model to generalize better closer to the domain. So if it's only been trained on fins, it probably does better on fins. But another thing is, if you introduce a completely new species, for example, seals, what you can expect is if you jointly train less amount of data than you would usually do for a new species, the model gets up to speed much faster. Meaning small data sets now have bigger impact than they previously had. And we hope that with larger architectures, even more training data, we kind of expand this bubble of knowledge or coverage, whereas the barrier to entry becomes lower and lower to the point of reducing it to zero shot, even to a distinct species. But that's to be explored.
Okay,
Great.
there's quite a few
Thank you,
questions.
Lasha.
Sorry, Rob, I just spoke over you. There's quite a few questions happening in the chat, so I'm going to pop you over to pick them up, and I think there'll be a bit of some of the other talks are going to be interesting in this context as well, and we'll also have the after hours time to have more of an open discussion about generalized models, and I think this is a really big breakthrough from you guys and what we're seeing in ML. I am not an ML expert, but in my understanding, this is like a really significant jump forward. So thank you really very much for coming along and sharing with us. And I don't know, keep up the good work. That feels a bit wrong to say, but yeah, it's really exciting.